Last weekend, community volunteers and local governments, tired of waiting, took action themselves by cleaning up abandoned vessels, despoiling shorelines in the district of Oak Bay. Oil spills and marine debris from thousands of abandoned vessels pollute our waterways and put local fishing and tourist industry jobs at risk. For too long, jurisdictional gaps have left coastal communities with nowhere to turn when they need help cleaning up abandoned vessels. It's taking a huge financial toll on local governments and volunteers. Oak Bay's local government paid $4,000. The province of BC paid $10,000. Last fall, the neighbouring municipality of Saanich paid $50,000 to clean up abandoned boats along its shorelines. The Oak Bay local government said there are more derelict boats to deal with in its area, but it won't be able to afford to pay what it did for this past weekend's cleanup every year. Coastal volunteers have carried the load of abandoned vessels for too long when provincial and federal governments should have been taking the lead on this long-standing coastal pollution problem. There is no practical or reasonable framework to preventing and responding to wrecks. Bill C-352 would change that." End quote. From Tofino, BC to Fogo Island in Newfoundland and Labrador, coastal communities are urging the Liberal government to adopt my legislation, Bill C-352, to clean up abandoned vessels and protect our waterways and coastlines. This includes the Union of BC Municipalities, which last month, its 1,800-member convention endorsed my bill, the Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities, District of Oak Bay, District of Tofino, and altogether more than 50 coastal organizations from both sides of the country. I also have the support of the Ladysmith Maritime Society, marinas, harbours, and port authorities from Nova Scotia, Newfoundland and Labrador, Ontario, and British Columbia. All these endorsements highlight that coastal communities can't wait any longer to fix the abandoned vessel problem. When will this government heed coastal communities' repeated calls for action and adopt my legislation to solve the long-standing problem of abandoned vessels?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. And I'd like to assure her that our government is actively implementing a comprehensive strategy to address abandoned and wrecked vessels under the Oceans Protection Plan. Budget 27 invested in this priority. Problems with these vessels have persisted for decades. The issue is indeed complex. The causes are multifaceted and therefore demand a robust solution. We've studied the problem, worked with our partners and stakeholders, and we're now taking meaningful actions that will make a real difference to our coastal communities. The government launched 2 funding programs this year to address legacy, abandoned, wrecked, and hazardous vessels. We've dedicated funds for these programs to support provinces, territories, Indigenous organizations, local communities, and other partners in removing and disposing of smaller, high-priority abandoned boats and wrecks. These programs were launched this year. To implement our comprehensive strategy, we are taking steps. These were just the first. While this funding will help address the legacy problem, it's not enough on its own. We'll need to take the burden off taxpayers. This is why we're also exploring long-term funding options, financed by vessel owners, to pay for any future cleanup costs. But cleanup efforts are only one element of the strategy. We can't wait for problems to occur before taking action. We are also focused on prevention. We must turn off the tap and stop the flow of these vessels in the first place. We have modeled our strategy on leading international initiatives. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that the majority of vessel owners are responsible and, in fact, are among the advocates for action on this issue. Like all Canadians, boaters and commercial vessel operators expect our oceans and harbours to be clean and free of abandoned and wrecked vessels. It really is a minority of vessel owners that are creating this problem. We're working on a comprehensive legislative solution, one that goes far beyond any previously considered by this House. There needs to be consequences for owners who choose to walk away from their vessels. Gaps in our federal laws have encouraged the problem for far too long. Existing laws that address some of the specific impacts of these vessels, such as pollution, discharge, and navigation hazards, but not with the vessels themselves. Our objectives are to strengthen owner liability for their vessels and wrecks, address irresponsible vessel management, and ensure the ability to take proactive action before problem vessels pose greater hazards and costs. As members of the House are aware, the Nairobi International Convention on the Removal of Wrecks 2007 was just recently tabled in our Parliament. This important step signals how serious we are in our approach to addressing this issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
These are all good words, but without any legislation to back them up, I'm afraid that coastal communities are going to be asked to wait again. The money announced by the government for abandoned vessel removal is a drop in the bucket, given the scale of the problem. There are thousands of abandoned vessels. The number is growing as recreational and commercial fleets age. But the budget announcements from Transport Canada, $300,000 for this year. Fisheries and Oceans Canada, $260,000 for this year. The price tag for the Vicky Lynn 2 removal alone was $1.2 million. So given the tiny budget announcement and the backlog of thousands of abandoned vessels, it'll take multiple decades to deal with them all at this pace. My legislation would get taxpayers off the hook by fixing vessel registration and creating a fee to help cover the cost of vessel disposal. So in the absence of the government having its own legislation to offer this House, will it adopt my legislation, Bill C-352, to solve the long-standing pollution problem of abandoned vessels?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we need a comprehensive approach to addressing this complex issue of abandoned vessels and wrecks, and it requires an engagement with those most directly connected to the problem. We've established very strong working relationships with the provinces and territories on the issue. We're continuing to work with them on implementing a national strategy. We've taken very meaningful steps to address the issue, including by providing funding for and acting to deal with legacy problem vessels. We're actively working to improve vessel ownership information, and we've tabled the Nairobi Convention in this House, demonstrating our commitment to ensure owners are strictly liable for remediating wrecks. Our commitment is clear, our action has been meaningful, and we're not done yet.